Didn't go to the wedding. I wasn't invited. That's the part that still catches in my throat when I say it out loud. Not because I'm bitter anymore. I'm past that. But because for a long time, I genuinely didn't understand what I had done wrong. I replayed every conversation, every family dinner, every quiet car ride home where nobody said what they actually meant. And I kept coming up empty. My brother got married on a Saturday in October. The leaves were turning. I know because I was sitting in my apartment eating cereal for dinner, watching them fall outside my window while my phone lit up with Instagram notifications from people I hadn't seen in years, people who were apparently at the wedding, in the photos, laughing, clinking glasses, wearing boutonnieres. I wasn't there. Let me back up. I'm the oldest. My brother is 4 years younger than me, and growing up, that gap felt enormous in ways nobody ever talked about. He was the one who got the new cleats for soccer. I got hand-me-down sneakers from my cousin. He was the one my mother drove to every practice, every game, every tournament in 3 different states. I stayed home and learned how to cook dinner, because someone had to. My dad worked double shifts at the plant and came home too tired to ask how either of us was doing. That was just how it was. I don't say this to make my family sound like villains. I say it because it's important to understand the baseline. The thing that was already established before any of the real trouble started. The dynamic was set before I was old enough to name it. I left for college on a partial scholarship and 2 jobs. I waited tables on weekends and tutored underclassmen in accounting during the week. I graduated in 3.5 years, moved to Cincinnati, and got a job at a mid-sized firm doing bookkeeping. Within 2 years, I'd moved up to a full accounting role. I was good at it. Numbers made sense to me in a way that people sometimes didn't. My brother, meanwhile, dropped out of community college after 1 semester, moved back home, and cycled through a few jobs, warehouse, delivery, a brief and apparently disastrous stint selling insurance. My parents never said a word about it. Not one word of comparison, not one suggestion that maybe he needed to figure himself out. He was just finding his way. That was the phrase they used. Finding his way. When I was finding my way, I was waiting tables at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. But I let it go. I really did. I was building something and I didn't need them to validate it. Then my dad had the heart attack. It was the spring of my 28th year. Not fatal. He survived, he's still alive, but bad enough to put him out of work for 4 months. And the bills piled up fast. My parents had some savings, but not enough. My mother called me crying, and I did what I always do. I said yes before I even knew what I was agreeing to. I started sending money home. At first, it was $400 a month to help with utilities and groceries. Then it crept up to $700 when my dad's rehab appointments weren't fully covered by insurance. Then, somewhere around month 3, my mother mentioned, very casually, the way she mentioned everything important, that they were behind on the mortgage. I was making good money by then, not wealthy but stable. I had my own rent, my own student loans I was still chipping away at, my own retirement contributions I'd only recently started taking seriously. But I looked at what they needed and I restructured my whole budget. I started covering their mortgage. $1,140 a month. I know that number by heart because I transferred it on the 15th of every month for the next 3 years. My dad recovered. He went back to work part-time about 8 months after the heart attack. Lighter work than before, but steady. My mother went back to her job at the dental office. They were both working. The crisis, as far as I understood it, had passed. But nobody said anything about me stopping the payments. And here is the part I'm still working through in therapy. I didn't stop either. I didn't want to have the conversation. I told myself they were still getting back on their feet. I told myself it was family. I told myself a lot of things at 2 in the morning when I was recalculating my budget and wondering why I couldn't seem to save anything. My brother was still living at home during most of this. He'd gotten a job as an HVAC technician, which actually suited him. He was good with his hands, always had been, and he was making decent money. He wasn't paying rent at the house. He was just there, and it was fine, apparently. Everyone was fine, except me, quietly subsidizing a household I didn't live in. In year 2 of the payments, I met someone. His name was Joel, and he was an architect, and he made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in a long time. We dated for about a year before we started talking seriously about moving in together. Maybe eventually buying a place. I ran the numbers. With what I was sending home every month, I didn't have enough for a down payment on anything. Not in this city, not in this market, not the way things were going. I finally brought it up with my mother. Not in an accusatory way, Or at least I tried not to be. I said I was thinking about buying a place and that I'd need to redirect some of my finances. I said it gently. I gave her months of lead time. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "We're still not back to where we were before your dad got sick." And I said, "Mom, it's been 2 years." And she said, "You know how these things take time." And that was it. That was the whole conversation. I kept paying. Joel and I broke up 8 months later. It wasn't only the money, but it wasn't not the money either. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being stretched so thin for so long that you start to feel hollow. He said I seemed checked out. He wasn't wrong. I was checked out. I had given so much of my attention and energy to a financial obligation, I'd never even formally agreed to that. I had almost nothing left over. After that breakup, I sat in my apartment for a weekend and did not move from my couch. And somewhere in the middle of the second day, I started doing the math. Not 400 a month. Not 700 a month. 3 years of payments. $1,140 times 12 months times 3 years. Plus the earlier amounts I'd sent during the recovery period. Over $50,000. I had sent my parents over $50,000. More than my annual salary when I'd started at the firm. Gone, transferred. Dissolved into a household budget that somehow never seemed to improve enough to not need me. I did not call them that night, but something shifted in me that I couldn't unshift. My brother got engaged in December of that year. Her name is Sonia. She's fine. I want to be honest about that. She didn't do anything to me. She's a dental hygienist. She's polite. She has a loud laugh that fills up a room. I genuinely have no issue with Sonia. But the engagement party was the first sign. My mother called to tell me about it and in the same breath mentioned that it was going to be a small thing, just close people, and that I should plan to come. I asked about timing and logistics, said I need to request time off work a bit in advance. She said she'd send me the details. The details never came. I found out about the engagement party because my aunt posted photos on Facebook. A backyard gathering, maybe 40 or 50 people. Strings of lights, a folding table with a charcuterie board. My brother and Sonia holding up their hands to show the ring. My parents on either side of them, beaming. I texted my mother that night. I said, I didn't know the party was this weekend. She replied after about an hour. It was a small thing. Didn't think you'd want to drive all that way for something so casual. It's 3.5 hours. I had driven it a dozen times over the years. For Christmas, for Thanksgiving, for my dad's follow-up appointments when my mother needed someone to sit with her in the waiting room. I said I would have liked to be asked. She didn't respond to that message. I kept paying the mortgage. I don't know why. I genuinely do not know why I kept paying after that. Part of me thinks I was still hoping that if I was patient and consistent and good, eventually things would balance out. Eventually they would see how much I had given, and they would include me in a way that felt real. It's the kind of logic that only makes sense when you're in it. The wedding planning started in earnest the following spring. My mother called me occasionally with updates. The venue they were considering, the florist, the caterer. I listened. I asked questions. I offered opinions when asked. I never once said, "Is there a budget conversation we should be having?" Because I was afraid of what the answer would be. Or worse, what question it would invite. About 4 months before the wedding, my mother mentioned that my brother and Sonia were still figuring out the guest list. She said it had gotten a little complicated. I said that made sense. Weddings were tricky that way. She said, "We're trying to keep it under 100 people." That was the last time the guest list came up between us. I found out I wasn't on it 2 weeks before the wedding. Not from my mother. Not from my brother. From my cousin who texted me asking if I was going to be at the rehearsal dinner because she was trying to coordinate airport pickups for people coming from out of town. I read that text standing in my kitchen with a mug of coffee going cold in my hand. I texted back, "I actually don't think I'm invited." There was a long pause, and then she said, Oh no. I'm so sorry." I assumed. I told her not to worry about it. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. She sounded fine. Normal. Like nothing had been swallowed. I said, "Am I not invited to the wedding?" There was a pause that lasted just long enough to tell me everything. She said, "It's a small ceremony. They had to make hard choices." I said, "It's my brother's wedding." She said, "I know, but it's not my decision to make. It's his wedding." I said, 100 people, Mom. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then he just felt it would be less complicated. I asked what that meant. She said she didn't want to get into it. I asked her to get into it. She said that there had been some tension, some energy, and that my brother and Sonia felt it was better to keep things simple. What tension? What energy? I had been nothing but quiet and present and financial for 3 years. I had never fought with Sonia. I had never missed a phone call, never made a scene, never said any of the things I was actually thinking. I said, okay, and I hung up. I sat with it for a week. That whole week I went to work, I came home, I cooked dinner. I watched television and did not absorb any of it. I was running the same loop in my head over and over. My brother's wedding. 100 people, not me. The Saturday of the wedding, I woke up early and I could not go back to sleep. I made coffee. I sat by the window. Around 11 in the morning, my phone started buzzing with Instagram stories. My aunt, my cousin, a few family friends I'd grown up with, all at the same venue, the one my mother had described to me over the phone like I was a confidant, like I was someone who would be there. My sister-in-law, or I guess she was Sonia now, officially, posted a reel at noon. I watched it, sunlight through tall windows, flowers everywhere, people laughing, my brother in a gray suit looking genuinely happy. The caption said, "Married my best friend surrounded by everyone I love." Everyone I love. I set my phone down on the counter. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, then I picked up my phone again, went to my bank's app, and I stopped the automatic transfer. I didn't cancel it. That would have required a call I wasn't ready to make. I just paused it. Transferred nothing on the 15th. For the first time in 3 years, the money stayed in my account. My mother called on the 16th. I didn't answer. She called again on the 17th. I let it go to voicemail. The message said, "Hey, just checking in, give me a call when you get a chance." Breezy. Normal. Like she wasn't wondering about the missing deposit. My brother called on the 19th. I didn't answer that one either. And then my dad called. I answered my dad. He said, "Your mother says she hasn't heard from you." I said, "I know." He said, "Is everything okay?" I said, "Not really, no." He was quiet. My dad has always been better at quiet than conversation, which is maybe where I get it from. After a moment, he said, "We didn't handle this right." That was all he said. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He didn't promise anything, but he said it, and it was more than anyone else had said, and I appreciated it even if it wasn't enough. I said, "Dad, I've been sending you guys $1,140 every month for 3 years." He was quiet again. I said, "I couldn't afford to save for a place of my own. I couldn't afford to build anything, and I wasn't invited to my brother's wedding." He said, "I know." I said, "I'm not going to keep sending it." He didn't argue. He just said, "I understand." That should have been the end of it. It almost was. About 6 weeks after the wedding, I was looking through some mail I'd been letting pile up. I'd been in a fog, honestly, not dealing with much beyond the basics, and I found a piece of correspondence from a bank I didn't recognize. It was addressed to me at my apartment address, referencing a home equity line of credit. I didn't have a home equity line of credit. I made some calls. It took about 3 days of back and forth, requests for documentation being transferred between departments. What I eventually pieced together was this. My parents had refinanced the mortgage on their house roughly 18 months earlier. In the course of that process, a home equity line of credit had been opened using my information, my social security number, my name, as a co-applicant. I had never signed anything. I had never been asked. I'd never consented. The account was in my name. The liability was in my name. I sat with that piece of paper in my hands for a long time. The number on it was not small. I called my mother first. She answered immediately, which told me she'd been expecting the call. I said, "What is this?" She said, "We were going to tell you." I said, "When?" She said, "When things settle down." I said, "Mom, my name is on a loan I never agreed to. That's not a family decision. That's fraud." She got quiet in a different way than my dad had. A tighter quiet. Then she said, "We needed the money for the refinance to go through. We thought you'd understand." I said, "You thought I'd understand you opening a line of credit in my name without telling me." She said, "We knew you'd say yes if we asked." And that was the most honest thing she had ever said to me about any of this. That was the whole thing. right there in one sentence. They knew I'd say yes. They'd always known I'd say yes. And somewhere along the way, they had stopped bothering to ask. I said, I have to go. I hung up. I called a lawyer that afternoon, not to threaten anyone, not yet. I just needed to understand what I was dealing with. She was calm and thorough, and she walked me through my options. What had happened was, technically, fraud. Using someone's personal information to apply for credit without consent is identity theft. It didn't matter that they were family. The law doesn't have a carve-out for mothers. She said I had a few paths. I could contact the bank and dispute my status as co-applicant, documenting that I never signed. I could file a report with the FTC. I could pursue this criminally if I chose to. Or I could do some combination. I thought about it for a long time. I contacted the bank first. I disputed the co-applicant status and submitted a written statement that I had never authorized use of my information. I sent them a follow-up package with documentation, my own credit records showing no such inquiry that I'd approved, a detailed timeline, everything the lawyer had advised me to compile. I was methodical about it. Numbers are my language. I was very fluent. The bank opened an investigation. While that was ongoing, I did one more thing. I calculated the total of what I had sent over 3 years, including the amounts before the mortgage payments when I was just covering groceries and utilities. I wrote it down. Not to send it to anyone, just to see it, just to make it real on paper rather than a feeling I couldn't quite hold. $53,480. I had a number now. It helped, in a strange way. My brother texted me once during all of this. The message said, "Mom says you're not sending money anymore. I think you're being really unfair right now." There were a few more sentences along the same lines. Something about family, something about how I knew their situation, something about how this wasn't the time to pull back. I read it twice. I put my phone down. I did not respond. I'd spent so many years worrying about what would happen if I said the wrong thing, if I pushed back, if I made anyone uncomfortable. And sitting there not responding, I realized that the discomfort I had been trying to prevent for all those years had never actually protected anyone. It had just kept me quiet. I blocked my brother's number that day. I blocked my sister-in-law's. I didn't block my parents. I still don't fully understand why, except that the conversation with my dad had been different, and I wasn't ready to close that door all the way. The bank's investigation concluded about 3 months later. My co-applicant status was removed. The HELOC remained on the house, my parents' liability alone. My credit report was corrected. There was a note placed on my accounts as an added layer of protection. I did not pursue criminal charges. That was my choice, and I made it knowing it was probably more mercy than they deserved. But I also knew that the kind of closure I was looking for wouldn't come from a courtroom. It would just be more years of waiting rooms and phone calls and someone else controlling the timeline of my life. What I wanted was simpler. I wanted my money back in my own account. I wanted my name off things I hadn't signed. I wanted to wake up on the 15th of the month and feel nothing, not obligation, not guilt, not the low hum of anxiety about whether the transfer had gone through. That's what I wanted, and slowly I got it. It's been almost 2 years now since the wedding. I still live in Cincinnati. I got a different apartment, better natural light, a building with a gym, 200 square feet more than I had before. I've been saving, not as fast as I would have liked in my 20s, but steady. There's a number on a spreadsheet that I look at every Sunday morning, and every Sunday it's a little higher than it was the week before. My dad calls occasionally. We talk about surface things mostly. The weather, my work, a documentary he watched. Sometimes he says things that make me think he's trying to get somewhere, and I let him try. I don't close the door. My mother sent a card at Christmas. No letter, just a card with a printed message inside and her signature below it. I kept it for a few days, and then I threw it away. That's where we are. I think a lot about what I would tell a younger version of myself. Not the obvious things. Don't give what you can't afford. Protect your credit. Read everything before you sign. Those things are true, but they're not the real lesson. The real lesson is about permission. For years, I operated under a set of unspoken rules that I had never agreed to, that I would give and not ask, that I would absorb and not complain, that my needs were smaller than everyone else's because I was capable of handling more. And the cruelest part is that no one sat me down and told me those were the rules. I just learned them, the way children learn everything, through repetition and silence and the subtle understanding of what gets rewarded and what gets ignored. It took being excluded from a wedding to finally understand that I had been operating on a permission system that only flowed one way. They could need me, I could not need them. That was the contract I had never signed but had somehow been bound to anyway. Sonia's Instagram is still public. I don't follow it, but sometimes a mutual account shares something and I see it. They look happy. Their apartment looks nice. Good for them, genuinely. I don't think about whether they think about me. I used to. I spent a lot of time in that particular mental loop, imagining conversations, composing things I'd never say, replaying the moments I could have spoken up and didn't. I don't do that as much anymore. What I do instead is this. I sit by my window on Saturday mornings with a cup of coffee and I notice that I feel okay. Not ecstatic, not healed in some clean cinematic way, just okay, steady, like something that was vibrating just below the threshold of awareness has finally gone quiet. Someone told me once that freedom doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up one morning and you realize you can breathe a little deeper than you could before. I think that's what this is. I don't know what $50,000 buys in most people's lives. A down payment. A year off. A sense of security. In my life, it bought years of being included just enough to stay useful and excluded just enough to know my place. I wouldn't pay that price again. But I'll tell you what I did pay, eventually, and what it was worth. I paid attention, finally, to my own life, to what I actually wanted, separate from what anyone else needed from me. To the quiet, specific shape of a Tuesday evening that belonged only to me, with no transfer pending and no one waiting for something I hadn't offered. That cost nothing, and it was the most valuable thing I've ever owned. I used to think that being dependable was the same thing as being loved, that if I just kept showing up, kept transferring the money, kept answering the calls, kept swallowing the things that hurt, eventually the ledger would balance. Eventually it would be my turn to be chosen. It doesn't work that way. I know that now in a way I couldn't have understood at 25, or even at 30. You can't give your way into someone's consideration. You can't be consistent enough or patient enough or quiet enough to make people value what they've never had to earn. What happened to me didn't happen because my family was uniquely cruel. It happened because I let a pattern go unnamed for too long. Every time I transferred that money without being asked how I was doing, I was teaching them something. Every time I drove 3.5 hours and didn't say I needed to be invited, I was confirming what they already believed, that my needs were optional, that I would absorb whatever came and not break, that being the capable one meant being the one who required nothing. And the thing about teaching people how to treat you is that eventually the lesson sticks so well, they stop noticing they learned it at all. When I found out about the loan, my name, my social security number, an account I never signed, I wasn't even surprised. That's what I keep coming back to. I should have been shocked, but somewhere underneath the anger was this dull, familiar recognition. Of course. This is just the next logical step of a dynamic that had been building for years. They needed something. They knew I'd say yes, so they stopped asking. That's the quiet cruelty of being reliable for the wrong people. They don't resent you. They just stop seeing you as someone with limits. The decision I made to stop the transfer, to contact the bank, to finally put my own name on my own side of the table, wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't about making them suffer. It was about stopping the part of me that had decided, for reasons I'm still untangling, that I deserved to be last. Integrity isn't just about telling the truth to other people. It's about telling the truth to yourself. It's about looking at a situation clearly without the soft blur of obligation or guilt and asking, is this right? Not right by my family's standards. Not right by the unspoken rules I never agreed to. But actually right, fair, honest, sustainable. The answer, when I finally let myself hear it, was no. It hadn't been right for a long time. I think the hardest thing about growing into your own intelligence is accepting that knowing better doesn't protect you from doing worse for a while. I knew, somewhere, that the dynamic was off. I could see it. I was an accountant. I literally tracked numbers for a living. But I couldn't make myself act on what I knew because knowing and choosing are two completely different muscles, and I had never trained the second one. What I have now isn't everything. It's a quieter life, a tighter circle, a savings account that goes up instead of sideways. It's the particular piece of a Saturday morning that belongs entirely to me. That's not a small thing. Most people don't realize how much of their life they've handed over until they sit with the silence of having it back. Whatever you're carrying for someone else right now, whatever you've been sending, covering, absorbing, excusing, I'm not here to tell you what to do with it. Only you know the full shape of your situation. But I'll say this. If you have to hide what you're giving, or shrink what you need, or disappear from your own life in order to maintain someone else's comfort, that's not love. That's a system. And you are allowed to leave systems that were never designed with you in mind.